So today's topic is, simply put it, how do you stimulate demand, right? At the end of the day, if there's no one buying, what's the point of us coming to the party? So to start the party, we have to ensure that the demand is both generated and sustained, or not only sustained, but it grows steadily over the years to come. So like last time's workshop, the session today, we have a number of lead discussants. Dr. Stefan Kaufmann, who's advisor to the board of ThyssenKrupp. Stefan joins us from Germany. He's also a board member at the Green Hydrogen Organization. Rolf Berndt, Rolf's a senior advisor with GIZ, very, very well entrenched in the development finance universe. Mr. Subhash Kumar, who's a director with Acme, one of the leading developers in the country, but Subhash has a stellar career and recently retired as the chairman and managing director of ONGC, which is Oil and Natural Gas Commission of India. Siddharth Jain, who is founder and CEO of MEC Plus. Siddharth did some great work on creating a financial model and structure to model out green ammonia in the country. And last but not the least, my colleagues from Geneva, Jonas, who you heard from, and Dr. Sam Bartlett, who's a director with the Green Hydrogen Organization. So welcome everyone. Welcome my panelists and all the participants who are listening in today. So really to kick off, I'll alter the sequence a little bit, only because Siddharth and Stefan have time restrictions.
Hi everyone. So thank you for having me here. I represent MEC. MEC is a consulting company supporting clients in investing in renewable and hydrogen. The topic that I will be covering is to give an overview on the different demand derivatives in India, the demand for the different derivatives in India, and what is currently the thinking of the government. So, I'll just start by talking about what is happening in the hydrogen space in India already. So India is already a producer and consumer of hydrogen, and we are the fourth largest at that in the world. We produce and consume 6 million tons of hydrogen every year. The largest producer is, of course, China, followed by US and Europe, very closely between US and Europe, and then India is one of the largest producers. Globally, 69 million tons of hydrogen is produced, out of which India is then sort of producing 10%. So it's a pretty big number, and we are one of the largest producers and consumers. Where is it produced and consumed? It's consumed in 4 sectors, out of which 2 are the bulk. Fertilizer and refinery take up 95% of the total production and consumption in India. Fertilizer, you require hydrogen to produce ammonia, which is then used to produce urea. In refinery, you use hydrogen to desulfurize your crude oil through hydrodesulfurization. And then there is a limited use that is happening in the steel industry, where you produce hydrogen to reduce iron ore to specific raw material that can be used to produce steel. And then it is used for producing formaldehyde and acetic acid in the form of methanol in India. Methanol is used in a lot of industrial products and beauty products and cosmetics. Apart from what we are producing and consuming locally, we are also importing hydrogen in different product formats. So we import fertilizers, we import ammonia, we import methanol. We are importing a lot of fertilizer. The hydrogen content of this is around 1.2 million tons per annum. We are importing hydrogen in terms of the ammonia itself, which is then used by the fertilizer plants, that contributes 500,000 tons. We are importing methanol, of which hydrogen content is 0.4. So this adds another 2.1 million tons of hydrogen that is consumed in India. So approximately we are using 8 million tons per annum of hydrogen as of now. And this is growing as the economy is growing. We are getting industrialized. So more refinery usage, more use in industrial feedstocks and assets, that's sort of growing. So it's a pretty big market that is there, and a lot of that is important. The government wanted sort of to, set up not only green hydrogen to not only replace the imports that are there, but also to look at what are the new sectors in which hydrogen can be used and whether we can then go into the exports as well. So this is from a paper published by Niti Aayog, which talks about, if India were to make a target of 5 million tons per annum for production of green hydrogen, what could be the derivatives and what could be the sectors in which it could be targeted. They said that, okay, if India were to do nothing in terms of incentives, in terms of support, just give what is required to sort of, basically support it by not putting a lot of taxes, but continue with business as usual. Naturally, as the demand is growing and imports are growing, we can get up to 1.7 million tons per annum just by substituting the refinery and the fertilizer demand that will come up, because we can reduce some of the imports that are there. Then they said that, okay, if the government were to further provide incentives, then they can add up another 2.5 to 3 million tons per annum. And that is what we should go for. There was another case that Niti Aayog had presented that talked about a 10 MTPA annual target, which was primarily based on exports that should be done. So there the government at that point in time said that the mandates can be that, okay, we can have a 50% green hydrogen mandate by 2030 and 100% green hydrogen mandate by 2035 in the refinery sector, because the consumption is only 2 to 4% contribution to the cost of hydrogen. So this can go to 50 to 100% in the next decade or so. In the fertilizer sector, there is a very high cost of ammonia, which leads to fertilizer. If you move it to green ammonia, it will be costly. So the contributions can be lower, but we should try to sort of get all the import of ammonia that is happening to convert it into green hydrogen and provide domestic targets around 2040 so that we convert around that. Then 3-4 more sectors were considered. One was glass blending as a sector where we said that, okay, we are anyways having huge growth in gas demand and want to put them in city gas distribution. Why don't we produce a 10% blending target and 20% blending target for 2025 and 2030? In the heavy duty vehicles, there is a dilemma whether we should go battery way or it will go hydrogen way. So why don't we do a pilot? We should probably have 1,000 trucks, 50 boats, and 10 aircrafts piloted by 2030, and 3 hydrogen corridors in which this can be run. Then in steel, there should be a mandate to give 20 MTPA of green steel production. And in methanol, absolute import substitution should be considered. That is there for any new methanol that is to be imported, because the market is growing. So this was a Niti Aayog report published with Rocky Mountain Institute with US support, and this is what the projections were there. So demand mandates have still not come, but what has come so far are a series of policies on the supply side. So it started in August 2021 when Prime Minister said that India wants to launch a green hydrogen mission. In February 2022, the government came up with the green ammonia policy, which talks about, we want to create demand, we want to create incentives for manufacturing, we want to do R&D, we want to do pilots. Then the government came up with green energy open access rules, notifying how the rules will be for any renewable power that goes into the hydrogen plant. Then it came up with policy in January 2023, announced that, okay, we are going to give these incentives over the next few years, total outlay being around 20,000 crores that will be spent in the coming 3-4 years to incentivize green hydrogen. And after that, in June 2023, the government introduced the bidding guidelines for manufacturing and hydrogen production. In July 2023, the RFS tenders were released and R&D roadmap was released. And in August 2023, that is last month, the standards for green hydrogen were released. What is the definition of green hydrogen in India? So a lot of these supply side incentives have come. I'll probably take you through the main policies. So this is coming from the main hydrogen policy that the government had launched. In the January 2023 policy, the government designated 4 sectors, fertilizers and refineries, as the main sectors in which the targets will be given. Then they designated mobility, steel, and storage and export as the other 3 sectors in which targets should be defined under this. In fertilizers, government wants that by 2034-35, all imports from ammonia that is happening, we saw that in the previous slide, which adds around 1.2 MTPA, that should be substituted by green ammonia. and the targets will be announced next year. And there's a lot of consultation going on who will pay for what and how much. In the refineries, the government will designate consumers that they adopt green hydrogen and city gas distribution starting 2025. And they would ask PSUs to charter at least one ship by 2027, which is running on green hydrogen. In mobility, there will be a viability gap funding that will be given to support fuel cell-based electric vehicles. There will be development of hydrogen highways. There will be 2 ships that will be retrofitted or with green hydrogen fuels. And there will be development of ports for refueling of infrastructure. So, if ports have a green hydrogen refueling system, then that's the starting point of your hydrogen highway. And then you can have something which is 500 kilometers away and you can run that. In steel, the government will give very small mandates to steel industry because it's very costly. The blending percentage is likely to increase on time. And in storage and export, bunkering facility will be set up at one port by 2025. Corridors will be set up for refinery and fertilizers, and islands will be set up in the vicinity of India to develop the connectivity. And apart from that, the government wanted to sort of provide, coordination between all the ministries. They want to provide clarity on what is the infrastructure requirement that is coming so that infrastructure can be utilized to maximum. Do demand aggregation and create legal provision for green hydrogen adoption, not like RPO where things will not be there, and map out the risks and provide safety protocols and infrastructure investment. Overall, if you look at all the incentives that have been given in the market, there have been incentives on renewable power production, there are incentives on power transmission and supply, there are incentives given for electrolyzer production and hydrogen production, there are incentives to be given for storage and distribution, and aggregation of demand that is happening. And apart from that, the state governments are also announcing policies to support green hydrogen production. There's a lot of focus on production. Demand is still in terms of vision and ambition, but there are some indicators in which the way the demand and the mandates will develop for hydrogen. So that's what I wanted to cover on the demand side as part of my presentation.
Thanks, Siddharth. And if you just bring on that slide where you summarize all the incentives.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was last but one slide.
Let me just share my screen. I think it has. Sorry. Interface for Zoom somehow not working for me.
Never mind. Let's just carry on. So just a very, very direct question, Siddharth, on there are a lot of incentives being given on the generation side, right?
Yes.
But there is no clarity as to what the incentives are on the procurement or demand side. So aggregation is not an incentive, right? Aggregation is just facilitation and sort of streamlining the market transactions. But ultimately, the bottom line is the mismatch between pricing on demand and supply. Who bears the risk? So if you don't mind just talking through from your experience, what is the kind of delta gap in terms of the purchase price and the production price or production cost, including the cost of delivery?
What happens, is that the production price actually depends upon 2 very important factors. One is the cost of electricity that goes into the production of hydrogen.
We know what that is.
And then the second is the cost of finance. So they contribute significantly to the cost of production of green hydrogen. And when it comes to all the supply incentives, if you get demand certainty, if you're able to lower the finance costs and everything, then the cost can go down dramatically. So if I talk about what is the current cost of production and what is the current cost of me producing from natural gas, so it's a subject to the me taking some assumptions on finance and the cost of electricity. And especially the cost of finance, if it becomes very competitive, then this will change. So I probably will give you some sensitivities around that when I talk about that number, right? So if I take a a number of, let's say, finance cost being 10.7%. That is the weighted average cost of capital. And I take the electricity cost to be around, let's say, for RTC power, I'm talking about, that is round the clock power, which is a plant set up in Gujarat, which is producing wind and solar. I'm probably taking from Rajasthan, and I'm doing a hybrid plant, which is one of the best sites in India. Then I would probably get electricity which is hybrid at 3.2 rupees or something like that. And at that price, with 10.7% weighted average cost of capital, with $1,000 per kilowatt as my cost of electrolyzers, I would probably get $3.5 to $4 per kg as the cost of hydrogen. Comparatively, if I do natural gas-based hydrogen production, I'm getting it at 1.5 to $2. Gas is at $14 per MMBTU, so I usually get it around 1.5 to $2 per kg. So if I take gas at $12, $10 per MMBTU, then that will go downwards. If I take it towards 14, it will go towards $2. Now, if I reduce the cost of finance from 10.7% to, let's say, 6%, by refinancing, by concessional finance, by multilateral and everything, my cost can go down from $3.5 to around $2.7, $2.8. If I take the cost of electricity to be, lower, where my charges are, waived off, my losses are taken care of, then the cost can come down further, which is around 2.5, 2.4. And then depending upon, how I am, putting the next, because stacks have a lifetime of 10 years. If I engineer that in a certain manner and I put Chinese stacks and then I put, replace them after a certain time, then the cost can be very, very low. So I think the government is doing the right thing by putting all these supply incentives, by not putting any barriers towards a lot of technologies, that could be put in, or, and they want the cost to come down and see if the industry can find a way.
So that, if I may just pause, so you're saying a 4% reduction in your weighted average, your WACC, will deliver a $1 reduction in
Yes.
the levelized cost of hydrogen delivered, right?
Yes.
So
approximately that range.
Right. So almost a third you can shave off literally by bringing blended finance instruments and structures. And that was precisely our intention in delivering these series of workshops, that it's not just government's responsibility, it's collectively everyone's responsibility to find cost efficiencies and savings. So thank you for that one big number that has come out, that at 6%, right?
In fact, Sanmit, we have this model prepared. This is on the IGEF website.
Yeah.
You can actually calculate all these numbers here. So, if you look at, if I take a zero cost of finance, and this is a solar plant which is getting connected in Rajasthan, supplying to this without any banking. Banking is also a facility, and the cost can be even lower. The cost is coming to be $2. So if I take, and this is where, let me take the cost of, debt interest rate as 5%. Right. And then I take this as another 5%. Let's say, I'll show you the number, because then you can see the numbers, how it is working. And then it will calculate most of it, if it is not broken. So it will give you that calculation number. So you can actually calculate this in real time and see how the blended finance cost is changing, and it will have a major impact on the cost of finance. And then,
Great, excellent. So that was one instrument. What else did you have in mind in terms of other efficiencies that we can find?
So I think the cost of electricity, the curtailment rate, how will it be done? If the curtailment is high, then the cost will be very high.
Can you give a sensitivity on like you did with cost of money? Can you give a sensitivity on RTC power? What's the sensitivity? So at 3.2, you said at 10.7 you get $4.
Maybe I'll show you the presentation. I have some numbers calculated. I can give you exact numbers. Just give me a second. I'll open that up. Just give me 1 second.
And to all the other participants, this is very, very important, because a function of demand stimulation is reducing the delta between the production cost and the purchase cost, right? So if you've shaven off 1/3 already by bringing blended finance instrument, we're getting so much closer to market kind of getting activated. So the message overall is, let's find those efficiencies before we ask the government and others to take all the pain.
Yes. So
And another benefit of this is that you can identify the priorities. You know what are the major levers, and also where and how one can work. What is achievable now, and what can be deferred till probably later on.
Exactly, Subhash. Thank you.
So if you look at these levers, this is also, we have prepared a slide on that and share that with the team. So it talks about all the different levers that go into the calculation of the cost of ammonia and cost of hydrogen, and what can be then, alternatives to be able to reduce that cost. And this is the sensitivities on hydrogen. I think we have some sensitivities on the cost of capital. I think it's not in this deck, but I can't find them. But there are, some specific. I can maybe share my screen for a second. Yes. You see that there is this, how the capex impacts. What are the different levers that are there? So there is the RE plant, which has the biggest impact. If we reduce the cost of RE plant by getting the right mix on RTC, that can reduce the cost. Hydrogen electrolyzers is the second biggest lever, and everything else contributes very little around that. And so take this as what is the overall capex and opex that is there. So opex also attributes a very large amount on the costs that are there. So if you can very efficient on the opex side, then that can also reduce the cost significantly, because you only talk about the capex, we only talk about the finance, we do not talk about the opex. And but in Europe, when I talk to people, they are very much focused on the opex part. How should we design our electrolyzer systems so that we do not incur a lot of opex, and how engineering should be done. So a lot of companies are focused around that, because that's also adds a large part of the cost.
So that if you were to put a number, by achieving all these tweaks with various levers, whether it's on capex, opex, cost of money, other incentives, what do you think in terms of from $4, where do you think we can bring hydrogen down to on an as-is basis, right?
So, if you just take, I'll probably start from the basic principles, and then we will go to the cost of hydrogen. So every kilogram of hydrogen requires 55 units of electricity, right? If I am producing my power at 3 rupees, I'm already at $2 per kg, without factoring in the money that I have to give for financing, without factoring in the capex that I'm putting on electrolyzers. Now the government is saying that, okay, when you do hydrogen production, you get this 50, 40, 30 incentive. I calculated it will approximately be $135 per kilowatt of electrolyzer spend. So if I buy from China, I get 20-30% subsidy. So if I include that, plus I reduce the cost of finance, and I say that, okay, I ultimately get an electrolyzer for $500. I get the subsidy from government of $135. In the first 3 years, I get the electrolyzer at $300. That electrolyzer will run for, the entire thing will run for 25 years. So I will have quite a bit of leeway around that. So the cost then with a $300 with a 5% capex would come down to around 2.5, 2.7-ish in that range. So with all the tweaks that are there. So again, if I reduce the cost of electricity to 2.7, 2.6, which I shave off, then it gets lower and lower.
And at $2, if we keep our strike price as $2, we are bankable, right?
Yes.
Right. So you have to, right? So we have to find efficiencies to shave off another 70 cents, right?
Yes.
So it's a myth that the market is dysfunctional because no one's buying, when in fact you're saying that we are within striking distance of bankability.
We have to get finance. We have to get better electrolyzers. True. We have to make sure that the engineering of these product is done in such a manner that it, many factors. Sanjit, I have to leave.
No, that's it. That was my last point. So thank you, Siddharth, for really helping us and quantifying what is the delta between the market's readiness to bear the cost of hydrogen, and we've identified it sub-dollar, right? So that's also.
But that's
thank
all
you,
in the
Siddharth.
future. Yeah, but a lot of work needs to be done. But right now it's 3.5.
Of course, great. Thanks a lot, Siddharth.
Thank you so much. Thank you
for your introduction. So can I now bring in Stefan and Rolf? Stefan, $1 a kilo or €1 a kilo is we're bankable. And Rolf, you've always said we've achieved, particularly when the war was going on and the past price of gas was sky high. We in fact had a situation where green hydrogen was actually cheaper than gray. So of course prices have dropped, but 70 cents to $1 is the delta that we need to bridge. So Stefan and then Rolf, what are your thoughts on this particular aspect?
Look, I'm very much a fan in the markets. I believe the markets are more intelligent than everybody. Government and ourselves on the call included. Markets figured it out. We saw it in solar. Once solar became commercially competitive on its own, then it really took off. Therefore, just some ideas. If 70% of the cost of green hydrogen is in green electricity, and we saw it in the slides just now from Siddharth that actually your storage, so he called it banking, non-banking, that's effectively storage. If we can bring down the cost of RTC even further down, that's the major factor we have in order to reduce costs, which means figuring out battery storages, hydro, whatever. That will be the key to making electricity cheaper. And if electricity is 2/3 of the cost, that makes green hydrogen then more expensive. I have perhaps very controversial, but as a believer in markets, I think we often start too much with the supply, which is like Soviet Union planned economy. Why don't we start with the demand? And where the biggest demand is actually, for me, really green steel, because the cost of this green steel in the final product, let's say the premium that you pay, is far smaller than, because it's only part of the final product. And we have, of course, faced the challenge with green ammonia, where I agree with you, like for a couple of weeks, 6 weeks, it was actually cost competitive. But if you're making a 40 investment, you're not going to base on the analysis of 6 weeks only. And we're now at like $850, $900 per ton of green ammonia versus $650 for the market. So we have to really bring that down. Green steel is easier to do. What else did I write down? 55 kWs per K, what Siddharth just said. That is massive. So this is the challenge we have. It's not just the cost, but the efficiency of electrolyzers. There's actually now capillary electrolyzer in Australia that can supposedly produce at 40 kilowatt hours per kg hydrogen, and that is a massive saving. If there's other things we can do to make the entire process more efficient, so for me, it is a lot of much more dedication into research and to reduce the, let's say, the cost, the inefficiencies, the losses in conversion. So if I summarize, going backwards, it's really green steel, it's really how can we make the conversions help, and how can we bring the cost of RTC down. It's not directly hydrogen, but it'll have massive impact.
Thanks. Rolf, just elaborate a little bit more. We spoke a few weeks ago, and you said, look, and Siddharth articulated in his slides that the biggest demand comes from ammonia. So why would we not start at that end of the market rather than steel, which is less than 1 or 2% of the overall demand?
Then we can start with ammonia. It's just that the price gap is ammonia. It's green ammonia competes with gray ammonia one-on-one on price. And so if we can do, the government budgets are not unendless. They have limits. And so if we want to subsidize, we have to grow to great amounts. I'm happy on ammonia, I'm happy if we have like 2%, 5% mandate. I was disappointed with the government didn't introduce. It goes back to the fertilizer industry, which just in the end increases the subsidies the government has to pay. I think with ammonia leading to fertilizer, let's not go ammonia, let's go to fertilizer, which is actually the market. I think with DAP, so the more complex fertilizers, we have a chance. With urea It's complex. I think it's only if urea is produced on the basis of naphtha, you have an excess of CO2, which could be used for to produce the green ammonia. I think it's like 15%, 10-15%. So that could be used, and with Syngenta actually as GSM, we made the modeling, and it actually works. So I think like at the beginning, that's where it started with ammonia is really more green urea with using CO2 from excess CO2 from the naphtha production.
Sure, and let me just put the question in a slightly different order. So Siddharth talked about green hydrogen, not green ammonia. Of course, the cost of ammonia production also has to be calculated. Where do you think if we use the levers, which is blended finance at 6%, and other levers in the value chain, RTC power, improving electrolyzer efficiency, where do you think the delta would arrive at? So that's at 70 cents to $1 for green hydrogen, which is already a significant improvement. But what's the delta on the green ammonia side?
Well, I think I said so. I think we're at 850. It really depends on your region in India. And Rajasthan, so it was actually quite good. Other states which don't have that much sun, it's a bit more challenging. But I think we came out really like in some regions even cheaper. But it's really it's still you're competing one-on-one in green ammonia with gray ammonia. And once you have the ammonia, it's just another step in the process. So even the Haber-Bosch process, the costs are the same. So really the key cost difference between green and gray is simply your cost of gray.
And what is that price? What's that difference?
Oh God, sorry. You're asking me. I don't have has the slides, but it's that's why when it came down to the bottom numbers, it was like 850 for green ammonia, 650 the market rate. So we're $200. I think that's the key market price for $200 still, or a third above the market price for green ammonia.
So $200 a ton. Right,
$200 a ton.
So same in as far as green. So $2 a kilo, $200. It's less, right? So it's 20 cents.
$200 a ton. It's less, yes.
Right. So it's 20 cents.
Yes.
Right. So okay. So that's already.
But if you look at it, it's still like 200 over 650. That's like a bit like 30%. So it's the same like.
Okay. So we don't have the benefit of the model in front of us, and some homework for all of us to do. So $200 a ton is the delta that we have to find efficiencies for, and let's say $1 a kilo is the delta, or $1,000 a ton is the delta for green hydrogen. So that's our ask, and essentially the purpose of this call is, okay, how do you stimulate that demand, stimulate the market, and you stimulated the demand. So what is it that the government can bear, and what is it that we need to do from more development finance perspective to bring down the cost? So one instrument is the use of carbon or green credits, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Just want to see if Stefan's found.
But I will first underline what Rolf has said. There's a will from the customer side to pay an addition amount for green steel for the very high quality products in the car industry, especially the car industry. So the customers are willing to pay maybe 30% more. That is our expectation also from steel, H2 Green Steel as well, but also from TK ThyssenKrupp Steel. For a ton of steel, because we have a premium product, but it's not for every sort of steel, not for steel for building, for example. So it's the high quality steel for car industry, especially. Yeah, let's talk about the steel industry in Germany a little bit. So ThyssenKrupp is responsible for 20 million tons of CO2 emissions out of around 50 million tons of CO2 emissions in Germany a year. Germany at all emits 750 million tons of CO2. So, and there's a clear goal of the German government to be net zero in 2045, and also of the German steel industry to be net zero 2045. And that means that we have to find solutions to decarbonize the steel production. And there's also a political commitment of the German government that is important to say, to hold the production of steel, high quality steel in Germany, to not be dependent on other countries. So you may know that the European steel industry is less than 10% of the world steel production. So we want to hold steel industry in Germany, and we want to be independent. And that's why the German government spent a lot of money now for direct reduction plants, not only with ThyssenKrupp, but also with Salzgitter, for example, the other big steel plant in Germany, also the plant of ArcelorMittal. And what does it mean? We are emitting 20 million tons of steel, 20 million tons of CO2, producing 12 or 11 or 12 million tons of steel a year in Duisburg, the biggest steel plant in Europe. So, and with 4 blast furnaces. And we now will start to replace the first of these 4 blast furnaces by a direct reduction plant. And these direct reduction plants shall be run with green hydrogen. In the medium time, maybe with natural gas or maybe also with blue hydrogen, by the end is pure green hydrogen. So we started now to build this plant. It's an investment of around 3 billion euro. More than 2 billion of the investment comes from the German government or from the state government where the plant is situated. So, and the plant shall be finished in end of 26. And then we will produce 2.5 million tons out of the 12 million tons of steel a year green, and reduce the emissions by 3.5 million tons a year. That's the first step. And we will then have a demand of 150,000 tons of green hydrogen a year in this steel plant in Duisburg, 150,000 tons of green hydrogen as a gas. So that is important. The next step, I think, will be decided maybe in 1 or 2 years to also replace the second blast furnace, and beginning of the 30s maybe. So another demand of 150,000 tons. And then, to be honest, we will have discussions, because what will happen to the third and the fourth blast furnace? Will we import iron sponge already reduced somewhere else, like in Australia, in Sweden, or Saudi Arabia, wherever then? That will be a big discussion. Also in Mauritania, for example, there's the plan to produce iron sponge to export it to the European market. So I think we will have at least 2 of these 4 blast furnaces replaced for direct reduction plants. But I think we will have a discussion about the third and the fourth blast furnace in the future then. Okay, and talking now about prices, for sure, you can imagine every big project in the world producing green hydrogen is coming to ThyssenKrupp to ask for an offtake agreement, because at the end we are the biggest offtaker in 26, 27 at the moment. So everybody wants to sell hydrogen to us, but and that's a little bit problem. They want to have 20 or 10 years contracts with fixed prices. Everybody knows that the prices will decrease, maybe not as strong as expected because of the market situation. The cost of electrolyzers don't go down that much. So, but at the end it will decrease. So it's very difficult to sign an offtake agreement with a 10 or 20 years lifetime without any clause to decrease the price. And if you talk now, we talk about maybe, I'm not in the procurement of the steel, steel, but I think they talk about maybe 6 euros a kilo for blue hydrogen from Equinor. So that is at the moment. So coming to €1 is, in my point of view, very, very, very far in the future. So, but for sure we can't pay 10 euros, and so at the moment I think it's around 6 to 7 euros, and so that is the demand side. I think the plant will be finished end of 26, beginning of 27. But to be honest, you have to be honest also at this point, from a technical point of view, nobody is running so far a direct reduction plant with pure green hydrogen. Yeah, we have with natural gas, it's working for sure. We have some ArcelorMittal is trying to push in 7, 8, 10% of the hydrogen into natural gas. So, but nobody runs so far a steel plant, direct reduction plant with pure hydrogen. So that has to be proven that it will work at the end. It's not that easy at the end, but everybody is sure that it can work. Okay. So that is the demand side. And then we have some infrastructure discussions. We talked about green ammonia from our point of view. For sure, green ammonia is for Europe is a carrier. Yeah, so we need ammonia to bring the hydrogen from Australia, from South America, Latin America, from Namibia, from wherever to Europe. Because we can't ship the hydrogen and the gas. We don't have to ship, so we need to have a carrier. So we need to have ammonia shipping. I think we expect in the next 5 to 10 years, ammonia will be the most likely carrier. So that's why we need ammonia. And then we have the really big challenge at the moment to crack the natural gas out of the ammonia. Where we can't use blue hydrogen, for example, from Norway with a pipeline. So if we have it as ammonia in Rotterdam, we have to crack it, and there is no existing cracker at the moment. No, not a cracker on a big scale. We have crackers, but very small one. But for these amounts we need, we have to have a big cracker. And so ThyssenKrupp Uhde, another company of ThyssenKrupp, is, for example, in the market to build a pilot plant for a cracker. But yeah, it has to be finished at the end of 2026 in a big scale. And so that is really a challenge. And then for sure we need the pipelines. We need the pipelines from Rotterdam, from other North European harbors to the steel factories. It's not that difficult for ThyssenKrupp because we are only 40 kilometers away from the coastline. So from Rotterdam, we will have at the end our own pipeline. But there are some other big off-takers and big steel plants a little bit more in the center of Germany. So also they have to look for infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure to the harbors, to the ports. Yeah. So that are the challenges at the moment from the German steel industry, and we are on a good way. It's heavily subsidized. Yeah.
If I may just come in, what percentage of establishing the DRI process or any other process to consume green hydrogen, how much of it is driven by an incentive? So in your case, a capital grant from the German government of 2 billion euros. So almost 2/3 coming from the German government, 1/3 by yourself. So would you say that was essential in your decision making? All right. And is that coming in as a grant or is that coming in as a low cost loan?
It's a grant. It's not a loan. It's a grant. Yeah. There's something of a clause that it has to be paid back when it's not working. Okay, that starts a little bit, unprobably. But no, it's a grant, and without this grant, clearly we couldn't build this direct reduction plant. Also, Salzgitter couldn't build a plant without this grant. So it is necessary. We have an own investment of 800 million to 1 billion. But we need that grant to hold this steel industry in Germany and to produce green hydrogen, green steel. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you, Stefan. So you've highlighted the point that a big grant is essential to stimulate demand, and without which things are a non-starter. And just one more final question, Stefan. What percentage of green hydrogen do you intend to produce in-house, and how much are you going to buy from outside, given you being approached to sign long-term offtakes?
Yes, at the end, the plan was also to have a 500 megawatt electrolyzer close to the plant in Germany, but we couldn't realize it because the costs are too high. The partners are not able to build in time these big electrolyzers. So at the end, we have to import at the end up to 100%. So at least a starting point, 26, 27. So because we don't have substantial hydrogen production in Germany at that time. So all has to be imported. And for sure, we have to take about the CapEx side and the OpEx side. Now we talk about CapEx, but for sure we have to talk about OpEx, and we have to talk about funding instruments like H2 Global for the gap of the between the market price and the offtake price. But this is all ongoing. And maybe the last sentence to that, due to this grant of the government, ThyssenKrupp has to make a tender at the end of the year, beginning of next year, for these first 150,000 tons of hydrogen. There are discussions since 1 and 2 years with a lot of companies, but at the end we have to have a tender, and then everybody can apply at the end.
So there's price discovery, and then there's a true market participation, and that's what the government's intending. So in Germany's case, ladies and gentlemen, fellow attendees, what Stefan's saying, it's or at least in ThyssenKrupp's case, it's a large capital grant from the government that's lying at the as a foundation to stimulate this big demand, right? And of course, with this capital grant, with 1/3 coming from TK itself, one would have hopefully a lower price point at which you procure the green hydrogen, right? But I guess time will tell, Stefan, with what that price point is, and H2 Global's auctions. For those who don't know, the German government established H2 Global as not just a market-making instrument entity, or rather, not just as an aggregation entity, but a market-making entity, with a 900 million euro grant provided to H2 Global to procure green hydrogen and offer long-term contracts. But on the other side, it's happy to sign, or it's mandated to sign short-term 2, 3, 4 year forward contracts. And the mismatch in the tenors is where the risk lies, and that mismatch is what H2 Global is taking. So that's a structure that we will discuss in the coming weeks. But thank you, Stefan, for highlighting how things are happening in Germany.
Maybe one additional remark, sorry. There's also discussion about contracts for difference, especially for the high carbon intensive industries. And there was a discussion, can ThyssenKrupp get the funding for the CapEx side and for the OpEx side as well? But for sure we talk also about these climate contracts for difference for high emitting plants. And for sure we hope to get some funding also of this contract for difference.
Okay, point noted. Thank you, Stefan. Coming back to India, can I bring Saurabh? So you had Yunus, you have points?
Sorry, Samit, if I may just ask one very quick question to Stefan. Very interesting. Please. Thank you. That 150,000 tons, 26, 27, how would it be delivered?
Yes, it will be delivered via pipeline from Rotterdam as a gas. I think the first time from especially blue hydrogen from Equinor via pipeline, and the other should be cracked in Rotterdam. Will be delivered as ammonia to Rotterdam and then cracked in Rotterdam or Wilhelmshaven, and then via pipeline to our plant. That is the idea. But that's why I said the big challenge for the moment is not only to bring the ammonia, the blue or green ammonia, to the ports of Northern Europe. It is also to crack the ammonia, or crack the green hydrogen out of the ammonia, and we really need speed now. So we need a gas pipeline, the hydrogen pipelines, and we need the crackers, and we need for sure the port infrastructure. But that is done. Rotterdam and all the ammonia ready, so that is not the point. But the crackers and the pipelines are the bottleneck for the moment.
Thank you. So I guess the exercise we have to do, and we will be doing so in the coming weeks, is what's the sensitivity to the purchase or the movement in purchase price, the delta, the contract for difference that Stefan alluded to. What's the sensitivity to the input parameters and various levers, including soft and hard levers, whether it's financing or cost of financing or government incentives, and that's the sensitivity analysis one has to do to understand how far away are we from that market creation. So can I just bring Saurabh from ACME, as well as in your capacity of former CMD of ONGC. Saurabh, refineries and ammonia are the two biggest sectors that are consuming hydrogen today. What's the thinking in the refinery sector on purchasing hydrogen? Do they want big incentives from the government, or do they want the market to say, well, give us the cheapest price and then we'll take it?
And as far as India is concerned, we have a total consumption of around 5 million metric tons of hydrogen, fourth largest consumer of hydrogen. But our largest part of consumption is in two sectors, actually, fertilizers and refineries. And luckily, in these two sectors, government or government-owned entities have a very dominant presence. Both in fertilizers are supported by Government of India one way or the other. And as far as refining is concerned, where roughly 40% of hydrogen is used, actually it's predominantly run by the sector, has actually the public sector entities. Now, that's where the situation is, that as far as government is concerned, government is doing pretty lot to generate demand and to see that hydrogen takes off in India at scale. So if it were to obviously take off at scale, one is of course the pricing part and supply side of it, another is the consumption side of it. So for that, actually fertilizers and petroleum refinery sector has to contribute in a big way. So however, beyond the refining only, Government of India and especially Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas is looking into other aspects also where additional demand can be created. They are looking into a possibility of blending hydrogen in the city gas network itself, so that that once that happens, actually that will add substantial scale, given that government has an aspiration to take gas share in the energy mix from current around 6% to 15%. And given that gas demand itself will go up, and then share goes up, and that will be a huge demand. Similarly, there is also move going on to understand and experiment with the blending of green hydrogen with CNG, and that will again actually 98% of the country is getting connected through CGD. So whether gas is distributed as gas or as compressed natural gas at different installations, that will add substantial scale to the demand. Refinery I have talked about, and one of the ways could be that some single refinery, there could be a consideration. Not that I'm not saying that this is something in offing, but to look at the complete impact of how the economics and the scale is able to actually help solve the conundrum around hydrogen. Maybe one refinery is converted into green refinery, and that will help really understand the complete impact of it. The reason why I say also is also that government had actually moved as far as BS6 standards from BS4 standard, which required huge investment. And at that stage, very innovative solution to share the cost, etc., were experimented, and consequently, the impact at the pump head level was not that significant. So I think something similar could be done. Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, being the key consumer, is leading the whole exercise. And I believe that with the kind of discussion we started, with which it started, the numbers, if they come down, then actually it is going to be further give belief to the level of production, level of consumption that can take place in this sector, and also address the incremental demand on some of the things I have talked about.
Subhash, just again in our pre-workshop chat, we talked about the fact that the actual cost of hydrogen is negligible, right? In the overall scheme of things, and Siddharth also highlighted that is just 2%. And if that 2% is the strike price is brought down, or the delta in the strike price is brought down to 70 cents or to a dollar that Siddharth has mentioned, should the refineries not take a leap of faith forward and show the commitment that they are indeed wanting to green their operations, or do they need hard cash from the government, either in form of capital subsidy or operational subsidy?
So, Sanmit, as you very rightly captured, these were the discussions we had. India processes around 250 million tons of petroleum product, the crude, and at the end of the day, we consume around 2 million ton of hydrogen, which constitutes around only less than a percentage point. So, theoretically, while it's very encouraging to hear that there are different levers which can help bring down the cost, but even if one were to assume that the cost of this 0.8% were to go up 4 times, right? At the end of the day, the impact of this 4 times increase in a sub-element, which is only 0.8%, will be very negligible. And that's why I alluded to something like upgradation from BS4 to BS6. So, where a substantial cost was involved, and it was very innovatively the industry, the consumer, and the government actually, one way or the other, came forward and shared it. So, so the fact that overall impact in this sector could end up being lower. That's why I say at least we should start getting the real test of these numbers by declaring one refinery as green. Obviously, there one should be careful to support the initial efforts of the given refinery also, but it is perfectly doable given the kind of percentage of dosing you need to have for of hydrogen in the overall refinery thing.
So you're saying focus on a high impact commercial demonstration project to establish the possibility of decarbonizing the refinery space, and that should give a strong signal to the rest of the industry. But that's a utopian and a perfect universe, right? In actual fact, all refineries have to work simultaneously, right? And some will take the lead, and others will not. But my question really, Suvash, is the mindset within you being at the helm of affairs of a very large public sector utility, is the mindset there, or does the mindset within the refinery space, or the mindset will require, as I said, large chunks of cash and incentives from the government?
So I think if you during our conversations with different organizations with Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, which is the PSUs you are referring to, as part of Energy Transition Advisory Committee, it was very clear that all these entities are seeing the writing on the wall very, very clearly. All of them are aspiring to transition, and I'm sure you would be reading the press that they have substantive plans to do it. Of course, numbers are something which would be daunting to start with, but they are aware, and each one seems to be working on individual proposals such that they transition. In fact, quite a few of them, the major undertakings have announced that they will be net zero by 2040 or 2045 to be the last. Now, if for an oil company, if that were to happen, the action starts on a yesterday basis. Actually, if it can't be tomorrow, it has to be on a yesterday basis. So from that perspective, I think not only the government, but the managements are also pretty keen to make it happen. I think there will be hesitation to start with, but once it takes off in a kind of scenario which I talked of, that okay, if collectively one refinery is taken up to be declared as complete green, then you get the taste of complete story, and then it can be taken off very easily, because all of them have declared their plans to get net zero in another 15 to 20 years, not more than
that
that.
was my point, and that was my point, Subhash. So thanks for highlighting that. So we've seen or heard in this workshop that the sensitivity to cost of money is huge. We've also seen whether the money comes in as a grant or as a blended finance. We've also heard that we are within striking distance. There are other levers that we can use to narrow down the price gap, and we must identify what that sensitivity is and quantify what that sensitivity is. And finally, I want to bring Sam into the discussion. Sam, from a policy lever perspective, what are the levers available to the universe as such? We appreciate a lot of the work that you've done is looking at the market and demands in the European Union, but the same would apply elsewhere. So what policy levers, such as stipulated mandates, that one can bring in, and what India should look at in terms of creating that demand side energy?
Yeah, I was just looking at the chat, and I might drop a couple of, rather than give a long presentation, I might just include a couple of useful links for participants in the chat. And right at the top, Nish mentioned, the billions of dollars in the US on the IRA. And we've just found out this week that the detailed regulations on the IRA, we were expecting them in August. Looks like they're not going to come out until December. They might not come out until January. Now, the narrative around that was a game changer. It was going to make green hydrogen much cheaper. One of the challenges, and it's good that we're focusing today on the demand side, is that yes, it will make green hydrogen cheaper, but where are the offtake agreements? Who's going to buy the green hydrogen? And that is a big question in the US. You have companies scrambling around to find the best sites to produce green hydrogen the cheapest, but is that next to where the customers are? Because moving hydrogen around is challenging and expensive. So I think it's great that we're putting this focus on the demand side. I'm going to share and I'm not going to go into detail about what's happening in the EU, except to just highlight a couple of, the EU hydrogen policy landscape is complicated. There's all the discussion around RFNBOs, which you'd be familiar on with the definition there. But there are different targets so you've got industry targets, you have transport targets, you have a different maritime framework, you have a different aviation framework. And there are different definitions and different targets in all of those sectors. I'm not going to go into detail except to say that while the IRA kind of has attracted a lot of attention, I think this is where the EU is leading in terms of setting out specific targets for green hydrogen only in these different parts of the European economy. And that is backed up by two other important things. Of course, the taxes on grey, which is leveling the playing field. And the European is very important in terms of, you have these targets now for green in transportation, maritime, and aviation. And if you want extra credits, then you have to pay for them. And the other key piece of the platform from a European perspective is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And that is protecting European producers from production outside Europe that is not subject to taxation. So you have these three things. You have the emission trading system, which is taxing emissions, very important. It's leveling the playing field. You have the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and then you have the different targets in different industry sectors. I'll drop I'm not sure whether you can paste. I've pasted an overview that was prepared by Argus. It gives you an overview of the targets in different sectors. I think that's very, very important because that is what is going to drive offtake. And I think that's what we're hearing from lots of different producers is, yes, we're bringing the costs down. We're able to access various subsidies in terms of reducing production costs, but you can't get a project to financial close until you have an offtake. And you won't get offtake until you have the demand. And these targets in the EU are crucial in terms of generating that demand. So,
Sam, if I may just
yeah, go
pause
ahead.
you, could you just expand on who's paying for that differential? Is the EU as a monetary bloc saying, look, through the various mechanisms, we are going to pay the differential, or is the cost being passed on to the consumers in the end?
Well, yeah, the cost is being passed on to the consumer, but it's being, it's the same targets apply to everyone. So, if you are a fertilizer producer in Europe, you can see that the direction of travel is clear and that you need to start putting your toe in the water in terms of green hydrogen offtake, because the signals from a regulatory perspective are very clear. So you'll have you can see that the emissions trading system is, it's attracted a lot of criticism in its early years, but it's working in terms of taxing carbon. You now have these targets in different sectors. And of course, there's always ongoing debates about adjustments of these targets and exemptions and so forth. I mean, that's what makes following the EU policy dialogue complicated, because there are many different strands and there's lots of arguments going on about making adjustments and exemptions and so forth. But the direction of travel is clear. And as several people have touched on, you also have a growing interest in using contract for difference so that those customers that have to start using green hydrogen are able to access it. So there's lots of moving parts, but I think there's a lot of things that the EU is doing right. The IRA is a big incentive for making green hydrogen cheaper. It's incredibly important. But Europe is taking a different approach, and there's much more emphasis on the demand side. And I think fundamentally that's going to be crucial, because it's demand that's going to drive offtake, and offtake is essential to get to FID. So I think Europe has led the charge for a long time. And when you start to look through these targets for 2030, 2035, I think you'll start to see, I think that Europe will maintain its lead in the green hydrogen space because of these demand side.
So in summary, Sam, you're saying the demand stimulated through regulatory structures and framework, whereas a regulated carbon trading market, which most emerging economies don't have. CBAM is a whole new chapter that's coming on the horizon. Okay, it might be to benefit of some exporting countries when they're exporting goods to Europe, and if they seem to be green and they can find some delta in their cost of production and cost of purchase, they could benefit. And then there are stipulated mandated targets for each industry sectors. Now, cut across to developing economies which don't have these regulated structures. How do you stimulate demand from in Namibia, in India, in Indonesia, right? What do you do? So you're left to market forces, and if it's market forces, they'll get back to or revert back to, hey, why should I pay the differential? Because at the end of the day, passing on the cost means green inflation, right, to the consumer, and consumer doesn't want that. So what are those instruments that we need to bring? Can we lift something from EU and drop it onto India and other emerging economies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's difficult to generalize in terms of the specifics in different markets. The solution in India is going to be different from the solution in Indonesia, different again in Brazil. I guess just a general point is that this is a message that we're taking to COP and to the development community, is that you have a lot of energy and effort being put into these supply and demand side incentives, in the EU and in the US and in Australia, and that's all very welcome. But the real opportunities to drive down emissions are in developing economies. So, we really have to be smart about how we leverage funding from the World Bank, IFC, and many others. Otherwise, we're missing a huge opportunity to accelerate this transition in the countries that are going to add most to global emissions. So, it's like putting solar panels on the roof here in northern Norway. It's just a ridiculous thing to do, but people are doing it. It would be much better to put them further south. So, we do need to be looking at that question in terms of, and I'm sure that will get a lot of attention in the lead up to COP, is how can we close the gap in the markets where it matters?
Yeah, and I mean that's also a topic for subsequent workshops. Was where do you find the money? Institutional markets are at over 100 trillion under management. World Bank and ADB and all the other development finance institutions are probably 2, 3, 4 trillion, right? So where do you find the money? And most institutional money does not make its way to emerging economies. But that's a conversation for subsequent workshops. But thank you, Sam, and point well noted and taken that. Look, use the policy levers to ensure, in India's case, if not 100% of the market, can you jumpstart the market with, let's say, 2 million tons of the 5 million tons to begin with. So,
Sanmit, only as an addition to what I had earlier said, for decarbonization of even refinery sector, the financing is very much relevant, as you have very rightly captured. So that's something which will have to be secured, and all efforts need to be made for that.
Sure. So Subhash, the idea is, what do we do to stimulate demand? And I put 3 points in the beginning. The levers that we have are financial instruments and structures, which Siddharth very interestingly put out. The sensitivity to cost of money is immense. The other is price discovery, right? Creating or finding other efficiencies in the value chain, so we can discover that price, at what price points are PSUs and other big polluters ready to shift gears. And finally, as Sam articulated, we have a number of policy levers. So I think we'll have to articulate and quantify the sensitivity to each of these. So point very well noted that finance plays a huge role, and that's the purpose of these workshops that we are doing.
Now, some fantastic points from all the speakers over the last hour. I won't repeat some of those points, on VGF, on HPOs, demand obligations, rather, on policy levers, and most importantly, on financing interventions. But I will bring up 2 additional points here. One, sorry, let me get my video on. One is, it's important for us to look at the enforcement of some of these policy interventions as well. So when we're looking at creating demand, we can have demand obligations that the Indian government has talked about, or so. We can have sectoral views of VGF, for instance. But it really is important, the implementation of them. Someone did bring up RPOs in a humorous way, which was absolutely bang on in terms of the enforcement of the RPOs not having gone the right manner, and therefore the HPOs, whenever they come out in India, will have to be enforced in the right manner to ensure that you're creating the demand from a regulatory push angle as such. But there's another important point here. When you look at sectoral trends, right? And I have a few data points that I usually repeat in discussions. The steel production capacity in India is moving from 155 million tons per annum by about 60 million tons at the moment in terms of new capacity expansion. The refineries is moving from about 255 million tons of crude capacity by about 40 to 50 MT by over the next 4 to 5 years, largely driven by 2 new refineries that I'm sure the market knows. And in terms of fertilizers, given the challenges, I won't mention that at this moment in time. But the point over here is, if you're looking at such large expansion, 40% in the steel space and 20% in the refinery sector, it's important for us to have both regulatory and policy interventions on one side, as well as financing interventions on the other side for greenfield projects in India, as against brownfield projects in India or existing capacities, right? And therefore, let's not look at retrofitting existing refinery or steel production units with green sources. Sticking an electrolyzer on site, at the existing refineries or steel plants is a great nice to have. But looking at new capacities in these sectors going forward, starting off production in a much more green manner with a lower carbon footprint of the end product is perhaps the way to go. And I think the policy interventions on from a demand obligation perspective, from concessional financing, blended financing on the demand side, supply side interventions, for these plants would have to be tweaked to improve the case for new plants to come up rather than just existing brownfield assets. So I think that distinction is something that is important, and I would recommend this to the GS2 org as well, to sort of structure some ideas that the government might take up to look at greenfield plants in India rather than existing plants.
On how many, from a percentage terms, what's the new capacity that is likely to come on stream? And that's why we should not take our eye off the ball.
Absolutely, Sanmit. So I'll repeat the two sectors that I did mention. The steel sector is moving from 155 NTPA of steel production capacity by about 60 NTPA at the moment. I'm not sure of the timelines, but these are announced capacities. And I believe the refinery capacity is moving from 255 MTPA by about 50 or 60 MTPA over the next 4 to 5 years. And look, these are two of the four major hydrogen consuming sectors, as the MEC presentation indicated. And we have several other sectors which haven't even come up in terms of electric vehicle, rather in terms of fuel cell driven vehicles, in terms of shipping, aviation fuel, in terms of power to hydrogen back to power when that makes techno-commercial sense. So there are several other use cases, Sanmit, which are moving from zero at the moment, and therefore it's very difficult to predict what new capacities would be added. But for existing customers, these are the new capacity expansions that I believe have been announced.
And in some case, you could almost stipulate from regulation or policy that demand should be towards green hydrogen on day one, right? So that's a lever, an extension of a policy lever, and to sweeten the deal for the refinery operators, one could bring in concessional finance to say, look, you're not going to take the hit. So if the capex is going up, but your cost of money is going down, so you should be net neutral from a financing standpoint. So these are some of the levers that we can put. So again, comes down to policy levers, financial levers, and finding other efficiencies in the value chain. So thanks Arjun on those points. I have another hand up from Kiran Kumar Alla.
Yeah, I'm Kiran. I lead business development for Plug Power in India. Apart from all the great points that have been made, and in addition to what Arjun was saying, I think one thing I'd just like to add is the public procurement by the government is an important lever for demand creation. It creates demand certainty, it creates visibility, and therefore bankability. And the government, being the customer, can also provide access to lower cost finance, and that could be a great area to demonstrate the competitive. How do you make green hydrogen and derivatives competitive? Just for one particular sector I had in mind was green steel. India has a domestic consumption of about 100 million tons, of which I think the government is about 1/4, about 25% is consumed by the government in various infrastructure and construction projects. And if there is a clear mandate with a CO2 emissions reduction, I think that can kick off a lot of demand and automatically the associated benefits for the green hydrogen sector. So in terms of so that's one specific sector where this possibility is very high. I think apart from the demand mandates, the government has went back for whatever reason. So there is certain logic, while the cost of hydrogen in the refining is low, but for whatever reason, it did not come out in the green hydrogen mission. And we have been waiting for last almost 10 months now about the mandate coming and not coming. So there seems to be some challenge on that side. the supply side incentives are nice on paper, but then again, they're not triggering demand. For the market to kind of understand the potential and then see the visibility, while we have the most efficient steel production, but our carbon intensity is high because of the feedstock that we use, which is predominantly coal-based. So that is one area where government can be the customer and also the policy maker. And since it is paid through the tax dollars, not through directly by the customer, it will not lead to green inflation. I think that's a great starting point, I feel, and then similar opportunities can be explored in other sectors as well. So thank you.
So Kiran, to sum it, thank you for your point. So to sum it, charity begins at home and practice what you preach, right? Those are the two messages you're saying, that, you know, the domestic, so the in-house consumption of the government or government-owned entities is is a great starting point, and one should not miss out on that opportunity. And that's what all the others have also said, and Subhash could particularly highlighted that point, that focus on one refinery or one steel plant to demonstrate the efficacy or the strategies on decarbonization. So thanks for that point. Point well noted.
First of all, thank you to the Green Hydrogen Organisation for organising this. I really appreciate it. This is the second seminar I've went to, and it's been very, very interesting. I think there's one thing missing from today's discussion, which I think we need to keep in mind, is that whilst we can look at the economic value of hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives and their comparison against other fuels, and then we can look at what are the carbon implications for them. One of the things we also are missing is the resilience factor. In a recent mission to India, one of the things that came out of this, which was very clear to me, is that a lot of the industries in India rely on imported fossil fuels. And I'll use a great example, industrial gases. If you can't make industrial gases, your industry stops in 2 weeks. So I think the issue is that this hydrogen needs to also, its value needs to be considered in the terms of fuel resilience and the ability to look at difficult situations. And if COVID's taught us anything, it's that we can't expect everything to be normal, especially in an increasingly more volatile world. So that's it for me, Sunmit.
Thanks, and very, very important point. So question is, from a geopolitical risk, if there are other systemic shocks like the pandemic or a breakdown of the supply chain, and you can't bring the imports into your ports, everything comes to a grinding halt. So one has to price in resilience into that, and ultimately that's your energy security, that's your security on all the other factors. So Steve, just elaborate a little bit further. Who pays for that resilience pricing, right?
Well, who's the major beneficiary for it? And the major beneficiary for it will be governments maintaining order, maintaining stability. So if you look at the policy engagements that you're seeing all around the developing ADB's developing member countries, a lot of these policy initiatives are driven by how is it that this can make us more resilient, both geopolitically and militarily, and also from a point of view of continuing our development agenda. Because you've got to remember that the Western world is got a very developed infrastructure, but you have a lot of people who are still trying to get out of poverty in, India, a range of countries. That's a very, very important issue. So I think you'll find that governments making the effort to spur markets, and I think my view is that using India as an example, is that it's probably best that we look at trying to see what we can do with brownfield industry and retrofitting existing brownfield industry to make that more resilient. I'm sure others will be looking at large-scale investments on new greenfield projects, but from our stage, at this stage, that's probably what we're looking at supporting. We're seeing that direction, and we see two major drivers that we think need to be addressed other than finance, policy, regulation, technology, everything else. One is, who are the people who are going to operate these plants? Who are the people who've got that technical leadership. You know, the person who's got 30 years on site, and when something goes wrong is the person who leads the response. That's one issue. The second issue is, how do we identify what the low-hanging fruit for interventions are? And I think we can harvest. One of the things we're looking at is seeing how we might be able to make use of digitization and object-based modeling to assist government in identifying where these things are, and more importantly, accelerate the engagement so people can say all these different things we can do. Well, which ones make sense under current financial circumstances, and as things change, how does that model change? I think we can't do everything in one go. We need to figure out where the best bang for buck is, and I think we also need to make sure that we align with the objectives. And so I think the resilience angle from my side is the most important one.
Very interesting, Steve. So you brought a fourth dimension which we hadn't thought of, like you said, and it wasn't covered in the workshop, although you and I have discussed this in the past. But very important lever in terms of stimulating demand is resilience and energy security, or industrial security, whichever form of security you may badge it as. And that has a monetary value, and that monetary value is a form of subsidy that government has to continue paying. And can we aggregate that resilience factor, resilience quantum, and give some pricing signals to the market. So Steve, brilliant point.
Yeah, and just to add, in development speak, that is that there is a economic benefit over and above the financial modeling benefit. Just so that's how we would regard it. Okay.
I call it the DRR, development rate of return, or economic rate of return. Right. It has a very, very high economic rate of return. So thanks for that, and we shall definitely include that in the recommendations and the library of instruments. And by the way, you mentioned object-based modeling and digitization. We call it decision support systems, and that's already part of the extensive library that we are developing. So if you have very specific ideas on how do you help government make those decisions, Steve, I would love to have this conversation offline with you.
It was really nice to hear all the topics said. I am Karan Kotadia, by the way. I work for Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a policy research institute and a climate change think tank based in New Delhi, India. Just wanted to start off with a quick introduction. I completely agree with all the 3 points that were said by the speakers after the workshop. Throughout these discussions with Arjun, with Steve, and with Kiran. I had a couple of questions, one to you, Sanmit, one to, I think, Sam, pertinently. When we're thinking of offtake contracts in the medium and long term, we find it's challenging because of the expected downward trajectory in tariffs or the cost of green hydrogen at which it can be procured. And I remember you briefly mentioned that the GH2 or some organization had a mandate to forward these contracts to off-takers and mitigate that risk. I would just like to learn a little more about how this actually works and what are the incentives of the market makers, so to say, in such kind of an arrangement. And the second question to Sam is, when you mentioned the EU ETS, they do not necessarily detail out a pathway to achieve those reduction targets, right? That's left to the industries to figure out. In such a scenario, the marginal cost of abatement becomes an issue, and a sector-wise approach needs to be taken. And the hydrogen sector might or might not be the most cost-effective right now, as per current hydrogen costs, but the max do not necessarily take into account projections, or decisions based on the max may not necessarily take into account projections at each point of time. So how is that looked upon in a regulatory sense, and are there any structures around it to smoothen or to direct industries or large polluters to consider a alternative over another?
No, I guess my first reaction is I agree. I mean, that's the point of this mechanism is it puts the ball in the court of the company to say, right, you've got a number of different options. And I guess where this gets complicated is that it seems almost every month that a different thread of this European policy landscape is changing. There might be for example, there was some talk about sort of a carve out, a sort of grandfathering in of grey ammonia production facilities kind of thing. So that makes it complicated. My point is that the general direction of travel is clear, and that is, so if you're looking at if you're a company, if you're a fertilizer producer, essentially you have to explore a whole range of different options, because that essentially that the pressure is on from a regulatory perspective, but also from a customer perspective. It's just an expectation that you have to green your business. So whether that's looking at options for direct electrification or energy efficiency measures, or looking at opportunities for green hydrogen in the production chains. So I think that's the point of this regulation, is to essentially set out the direction of travel and leave it to companies to determine which option they're going to take. And I think what you see companies doing is exploring those different options.
Right. Okay. Thanks. That
Thanks.
answers it.
Thanks, Sam. And Karan, on the first question you asked on what is the structure market structure that market maker will kind of utilize in signaling price. So essentially, you look at a number of models, and these models are nothing new. I mean, to talk to any commodity trader, energy trader, they have forward curves, and they start looking at what are the different input parameters that will change the price of hydrogen. So if today we said, look, there's a $2 differential, but that $2 differential can come down to 70 cents if we change this one lever, which is the cost of money, right? And then you start to look at is there money available at that particular interest rate, right? Which is 6%, as was alluded to, or what is the probability of that money being available at that price point? So essentially, you input in your model a number of levers. You look at how the demand is going to increase. You look at how the input prices of whether it's materials or your equipment or your supply chain, how that's going to change over the next 7 or 10 years, and then you come up with a forward curve, and then you kind of normalize that or average that out, and you get a levelized cost of hydrogen over the next 10 years, right? And these models are very, very well established. The solar industry uses it, the wind industry uses it, right? Now, of course, you have to price in systemic shocks, and those are not very well priced in. And that's a whole, again, different topic, which is uninsured risk. And we'll talk about that in subsequent sessions. But really, it's not so much as the incentive the market maker has, it's the incentive that the investor has in buying that package of CFD from the market maker. So essentially, market maker is saying, I'm going to absorb the risk, but I'm going to downsell that risk to investors. And investors are either guaranteed to a certain level, or they're taking market exposure based on their advanced models. So I won't talk any further on this because we've got a whole session on this, but I'd like to bring in Sumit Chaudhary. Sumit, you're building one such demand platform, right? And pricing that will hopefully give some sort of a pricing index to the market participants. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about your construct.
Thank you, Sanmit. This is Sumit Chaudhary. I'll also give a quick background to the company. We are Green Earth Exchange, and we are in the process of setting up a global multi-country trading exchange and green certification exchange for hydrogen ecosystem products. When we say hydrogen ecosystem, we are looking at hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, aviation fuel, things that will essentially be used for decarbonization of these hard-to-abate industries, and essentially create a platform through which we are going to discover prices in each of these markets, publish it as an index, and also allow people to trade on spot, and also the futures that Sanmit was just talking about. So we will have a certain set of products that we are defining in different markets. And what we are allowing people to do right now is to start looking at the differences in the policies and procedures in the different markets so that it is baked into the software that we are building. So it is going to be a blockchain-based network connecting multiple countries. And in those countries, we are able to follow the local laws and procedures that are prevalent in that market. But we are able to bring all of them together into a global inventory that can be traded in different countries. So you can have a steel producer in Japan looking at spot prices in Chile and being able to compare and finding the arbitrage around all of those across the world. So essentially, some of those are getting worked out right now. It'll probably be relevant sometime mid of next year when things start becoming a little more visible, but we have started building it. We have started building alliances in Africa, in Europe, in the US. This is a Silicon Valley-based enterprise, though most of my development team sitting here in India. So I'll leave it at that. And over the next few months, we'll work with Sanmit and we'll make sure that whatever we are doing is made available to all of you. And we'll work with both the production side as well as the supply and the demand side to ensure that your products are listed and you are able to draw these long-term contracts based on the availability and matching of demand and supply, and be able to be a lot more accurate about that model that Sanmit talked about. Because today, a lot of those models are dependent on current prices, future prices, and a lot of the other things. And we are trying to make sure that some of that information is available on this platform.
Thanks, Sumit. And as I said, that's the topic of our discussion on the market making session.
Hi, everyone. This is quite interesting. So, what I think is that we have been discussing so far, as we call it under European directives, RFNBO, which is renewable fuel of non-biological origin, because the models and the discussions have been around electrolyzers-based hydrogen, ecosystem-based hydrogen production and how to go about it. Now, Europe also has got something called advanced biofuel based and RCF, which is recycled carbon fuel. Basically, there are other models of hydrogen productions where hydrogen is produced near the consumption point. And when we look at it, the entire financing modeling will also change. So what I was thinking that going forward in our discussion, we also factor in and look into those models which are talking about producing hydrogen near to the consumption point and what financial instruments they will need and how they could be possibly put in priority or maybe in preference to the other models. And thereby India could have an advantage of sort of creating a comprehensive overall picture around the hydrogen economy. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Then we'll start wrapping this session up. Firstly, thanks to all my fellow panelists and colleagues and the audience in the room for both having delivered some very interesting messages, but also contributing to the debate. And I think we got some fantastic ideas. The biggest discovery for me was that the delta between in the strike price is sub $1. So we can definitely find those efficiencies and incentives to meet that price gap. And if that happens, then the market is ready, the market is here, and market is now. So ultimately, it just boils down to giving signals to the market on what those price points are, and hopefully that should pique their interest in coming to the table and committing, if not very long term, but at least short term orders and offtake agreements, but of significant volumes. We also heard that policy levers are extremely important. Not so much from the price sensitivity, but the assurance and the stability of the market, because that also gets ultimately priced in and is a huge factor in creation of the demand. And finally, we also heard the financial levers that are necessary to bridge that gap. An interesting discovery on a point we had not factored in is the resilience aspect that Steve mentioned. And we shall definitely look at how do you start pricing resilience and what sort of assurances can the government give in terms of offtake, not so much as offtake agreement, but the subsidy or incentive that the government can give to hydrogen producers for providing that resilience. And final point on creating new platforms, digital platforms, was also talked about from a number of perspectives. So